Chapter 5 is titled Information Security Policy Implementation Issues. Learning Objectives and Key Concepts. The learning objective for Chapter 5 is to describe issues related to information system security, ISS, policy implementation and enforcement. The key concepts include human nature and motivation, organizational structures, policy implementation, organizational hurdles to policy implementation, and impact of executive management support. Let's take a look at the basic elements of motivation. Pride is part of the human nature. Individuals are more likely to become motivated when they are working on something that is important. If your work is discarded or trivialized, you're less likely to put in a high-quality effort the next time. Conversely, if you understand the goals and objectives of the team and see how your individual efforts contribute, you will likely feel a sense of obligation. It also builds team pride and spirit, which are important for future success. Self-interest. Self-interest and sometimes self-preservation is also part of human nature. Humans tend to repeat behavior that is rewarded. Having well-defined goals and objectives for individuals helps them understand what they must achieve. Those who achieve these goals receive rewards. Those who exceed these goals typically receive bigger or better rewards. Those more often are models for the others to emulate. To promote the importance of information and adherence to information policies, you should gain the support of higher performers. We move on to success. Wanting to be successful is part of human nature. Anyone who has played on a winning team knows the feeling. It's simply a lot more fun being on the winning team than on the team that always comes in last. If you are a high performer, it's hard to get motivated if your team as a whole keeps losing. It is no different in the workplace. Individuals build confidence when frequently recognized for their successes. Human nature in the workplace. Basic elements of motivation, personality types of employees, and leadership, values, and ethics. Figure 5-1, 3 basic elements of motivation. I'll just let you see what I just covered in a graphical icon here. It's got pride, perceived importance of work, self-interest, rewards and discipline, and motivation created, success being on a winning team. So we covered all that in the previous slide, but did want you to see this figure. Personality types of employees. People may be more than one personality type. Types blend, but one may emerge as dominant. Leverage strengths and weaknesses during implementation. Let's look at the personality types of employees. First is commander. They're demanding and not tactful. They might come across at best as impolite and at their worst as rude and abrupt. They are forceful when attempting to achieve stated goals. They can be agents for change, breaking from the past and overcoming barriers within the organizations. Secondly, drifter. Are uncomfortable with structure and deadlines. They might be great with people and communications because what they lack in discipline may be offset by their creativity and thinking outside the box. The next is attacker. They seem angry or even hostile toward ideas and others on the team. They are critical of others' ideas. They may know why things fail but offer no alternative solutions. They can be helpful in understanding the risk associated with a new policy, but don't expect them to offer solutions to make the policies better. Pleaser. They are very kind and thoughtful to others. They want everyone to feel good and will put their own self-interest aside for the good of the whole. They may shy away from enforcing rules that offend others. These individuals would not affect enforcing security policies. Performers like to be center stage. They like to entertain and be the center of attention. They develop over time a wit and charm to capture people's attention. They may not be the highest producers and may be in the habit of promotion. These individuals are good candidates to promote awareness of and training in security policies. Their wit and humor, when harnessed, are effective in communicating, while the security policy is important. Avoiders like to fly under the radar and be in the background. They tend not to take chances or do anything that brings attention on them. They will do precisely what's asked of them, but not much more. Although not good as leaders at looking beyond the letter of the policy, they will execute the security policy and related processes consistently. Analytical leaders. They lack structure and deadlines. They measure their success in precise terms of the number of widgets produced in a given time at a given quality level. They tend to be obsessed with precision and attention to detail. They may not be the best at understanding human dynamics, so working with customers and emotions may be a problem. They would be well suited for measuring the effectiveness of the information policy, such as by being part of the quality control function. And lastly, achievers. They're result-oriented. They may have several traits of the other personality types. For example, they may be self-confident, but not at the expense of others. They genuinely want the best result and may seek different ways to achieve it. Achievers are well suited to listening to all stakeholders and creating security policies that meet both security and business needs. Leadership, values, and ethics. Goals. Good leaders have clear vision and set goals. Training. Good leaders train their team to focus on goals and support each other's work. Support. Good leaders accept failures. People will make mistakes. How a leader reacts to these mistakes sets a tone that can be healthy or destructive. Reward. Good leaders reward results, not personalities. Organizational structures are chosen by management. They influence how security policies are put in place. They create complex relationships and personal dynamics between different leaders, layers of approvals, and core values. They reflect the relationship between teams or departments, their responsibilities, and lines of authority. Clearly indicate who's in charge and who reports to whom. Moment to look over 5.2, figure 5.2, typical organizational chart, lays out a typical organization. This particular slide shows the CISO, which is the Computer Information Security Officer, reports directly to the CFO. For example, you've got Office of President. Underneath that, you have CFO, Chief Legal Counsel, Executive Vice President of Marketing, so on and so forth. And you see under Chief of Finance Officer, you've got the Chief Information Security Officer. I can tell you from personal experience, sometimes this is a bad idea because too often the Chief Financial Officer is more worried about the bottom line than he is about security. Security is just according to the personality of that CFO. The chart shows the Chief Information Security Officer working directly for the Chief Technical Officer. This makes more sense. If you look at this, you've got the Chief Information Officer reports directly to the President. Okay, so you got a direct line of information system people all the way down to the Chief Information Security Officer. This is your best bet. Okay, this works more effectively because they're all on the same sheet of music. Hierarchical organizations. For large organizations, hierarchical models are a necessity. The complexity required to keep a large organization running effectively requires a hierarchy of specialties. This means senior leaders are more detached from day-to-day operations. Can the same tone at the top be sent to all employees in a hierarchy organization? Yes, but it's more difficult than in a flat organization. The dynamics are different in hierarchy organization. Let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of hierarchical organizations. Under advantages, hierarchical organizations, it's a hierarchy of specializations. Communication lines are more clearly defined. Depth of knowledge in a subject area tends to be greater, and the matrix relationships can be complex. That goes with large organizations. The disadvantages: senior leaders are more detached from day-to-day operations. Messages from senior leaders have to be reinforced through all management layers. Chain of command system like the military. Then you got lack of accountability, communication breakdowns, too many touch points, and personalities must be engaged. Challenge of user apathy. In its basic form, apathy is indifference and lack of motivation. An employee who is apathetic often goes through the motions. This attitude results in poor performance and doing the minimum to get by. In the case of information security, it's hard to imagine that doing the minimum keeps information safe. In security, user apathy renders the entire organization vulnerable. So let's look at this particular issue. It says an employee who is apathetic often goes through the motions. You can't do that in high security, high risk situations. This attitude results in poor performance doing the minimum to get by. You can't have just the minimum in security, regardless if it's information security, physical security, operational security. Then you have overcoming the effects of apathy on security policy is a combination of the following: engaged communication, ongoing awareness, setting the right expectations, creating some layers of redundancy, and recognize and reward compliance. That creating some layers of redundancy is imperative because it has a check and balance for these people with apathy. Importance of executive management support. Number one, implementing security policy starts with executive management. You've been taught all your life in management classes, for example, that everything starts at the top and has to filter down all the way to the bottom. Then secondly, implementing security policies creates a culture in which risk awareness takes work and resources. Thirdly, executive management support is critical to the success of security policy implementation and acceptance throughout the organization. Information security policies to an executive. Here are the 8 missteps when you're trying to do that. Unclear purpose. Unclear purpose refers to the clarity of value a project brings. In the case of security policies, it's important to demonstrate how these policies will reduce risk. It's equally important to demonstrate how the policies are derived in a way that kept the business cost and impact low. Second is doubt. This refers to the need for change. You need to explain why what's in place today is not good enough. Change is perceived as a distraction from the core business. You need to convince the executive that the benefits outweigh disruption. Doubt may also be a factor if an organization has had several false starts. If several attempts have been made to implement a security policy with little success, you must convince them that this time is different. Even when the message and benefits are clear, it is also a matter of credibility with the executive. Thirdly is insufficient support from leadership. Insufficient support from leadership refers to the broad support for the project. In the case of policies, a leader doesn't like surprises. Nobody does, and wants to know he or she is not alone. You need to explain both the depth and the breadth of support for the policies. To avoid surprises, be sure to articulate any pushback you are getting from other leaders. This will help avoid surprises, and the executive can be an advocate to sway his or her peers. When problems are encountered, be sure to anticipate where your support will emerge or evaporate. Organizational baggage refers to how the organization executes as judged on the basis of past unsuccessful efforts. Unlike doubt, which is a personal credibility issue, this category focuses on the organization's capacity to execute. If an organization continues to have problems implementing policies of any kind, how will security policies be any different? This type of organization usually fails to stay on course. Organizations that reorganize twice a year or have frequent leadership changes fall within this category. Then we go to lack of organizational incentives. This refers to the inability to motivate behavior. Value is only derived from policies when they are enforced. An organization must have the will and process to reward adherence. The organization must have a low or zero tolerance for security policy violations. Lack of candor refers to not having open, candid conversations. In the case of policies, you need to be clear what can and cannot be achieved. You need to listen and explain how the business's input was considered and adopted or rejected. Executives need a sense that they were part of the process and not just the recipients of the result. Low tolerance for bad news. I think most people fall in that category. This refers to how executives react to missteps. You can count on error in judgment at some point in implementing security policies. You need to prepare executives for the inevitable. You also need to gauge how they will react. And lastly, unmanageable complexity refers to how complex and realistic the project is. The ability of the organization to support the security policies will be an important topic of conversation. Before, during, and after policy implementation, page 1 of 2, clarity of objectives, what goals and benefits are to be achieved, things to do, what exact tasks are to be performed and by whom, and things to pay attention to. How does the business know if it is successful? During and after policy implementation, page 2. Things to report, what should be reported and when. Roles and responsibility, whose responsibility for what. Things to be aware of, why is the security policy in place? And things to reinforce with employees, what is the messaging to the staff? Role of human resource policies. Well-defined HR policies provide the framework that governs employee relations. Human resource policies state core business values and what is expected, can prevent misunderstandings. Although HR policies must demonstrate commitment to secure business practices and clearly state values, they must be flexible and defensible in a court of law while meeting business objectives. Automated enforcement of security policies shows consistency and often leads to a higher compliance rate than manual controls. The conceptual relationship between HR policies and security policies. This is figure 5.5, gives you a visual view of how that works. Just take a minute and have a look at that. Change model, basic policy implementation approach. There are many change models to choose from. You may be able to adapt some when implementing security policies. This chapter looks at Professor Goddard from Harvard School of Business. He developed the model, the Cotter's 8-step change. The model has been widely adapted for a number of purposes. It addresses the need to create executive support for implementing change. This is a critical success factor in implementing security policies. Step 1 is create urgency. Step 2, form a powerful coalition. Step 3, create a vision for change. Step 4, communicate the vision. Step 5, remove obstacles. Step 6, create short-term wins. Step 7, build on the change. And Step 8, anchor the changes in corporate culture. Roles and accountabilities. Let's start with Information Security Officer, the individual accountable for identifying, developing, and implementing security policies. The ISO is also accountable for ensuring that corresponding security controls are designed and implemented. The executive, a senior business leader accountable for approving security policy implementation. An executive is also responsible for driving the security message within an organization and ensuring the security policy implementation is given appropriate priority. Compliance officer, an individual accountable for monitoring adherence to laws and regulations. A compliance officer often uses adherence to security policies as a measure of regulatory compliance. Next is data owner. Typically someone in the business who approves access rights to information. Data owners are accountable for ensuring only the access that is needed to perform day-to-day operations is granted. They would also be responsible for ensuring there is a separation of duties to reduce risk of errors or fraud. Data manager, an individual typically responsible for establishing procedures on how data should be handled. Data managers also ensure data is properly classified. Data custodian, an individual responsible for the day-to-day maintenance of data. Data custodians back up and recover data as needed. They grant access based on approval from the data owner. You can view their accountability as generally maintaining the data center and keeping applications running. Data user, the end user of an application. Data users are accountable for handling data appropriately. They are accountable for understanding security policies and following approved processes and procedures. Data users have an obligation to understand their security responsibilities and not to violate policies. And lastly is auditor, an individual accountable for assessing the design and effectiveness of security policies. They can be internal or external to the organization. They offer formal opinions in writing. These opinions review the completeness of the policy design and how well it conforms to leading industry practices. They also offer opinions on how well the policies are followed and how effective they are. Auditors do not report to the leaders they are auditing. This allows them to provide a valuable, independent second opinion. Security policy to performance and accountability. Measuring the effectiveness of security policies is essential to maintain leadership support. The quality control function is a good place to obtain these measurements. Typically, a quality control function will sample security controls and test their effectiveness. These measurements are often shared with leadership, stakeholders, control partners, and regulators. They are a good indication of the health of the system and level of adherence to information security policies within it. Let's look at the number of security violations by employees reported. That's a determining factor. Also, number of incidents that could have been avoided, and completion and competency rate for security awareness. We looked at human nature and motivation, organizational structures, policy implementation, organizational hurdles to policy implementation, and impact of executive management support. Thank you for listening to this slide.